My name is Nicole, and imagine discovering that everything you believed about your family was a lie, all because of $30 million that appeared in your life overnight. That's exactly what happened to me just 6 months ago, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath of this betrayal. The people who raised me, who I trusted with my life, tried to destroy me for money they never even knew existed. Have you ever had your parents turn into complete strangers right before your eyes? If you've ever been stabbed in the back by your own family over money, please hit that like button and subscribe because this story will shock you to your core. Until this nightmare began, I was just a regular 26-year-old working as a nurse at the local hospital in small-town Wisconsin. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Peterson's bakery, drove my dad's old pickup truck, and spent most of my free time volunteering at the animal shelter downtown. My life was simple, predictable, and filled with work I loved and people I cared about. I never wanted fancy things or dreamed of being rich because I was genuinely happy with my quiet, meaningful life. But everything changed on what started as a perfectly normal Thursday morning in March. I was getting ready for my shift at the hospital when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice belonged to a woman named Margaret Collins, an estate attorney from Chicago who said she needed to speak with me urgently about my great-aunt Catherine's will. I barely knew Catherine. She was my grandmother's sister who lived alone in the city and rarely visited our family gatherings. I remember telling Margaret that there must be some mistake because Catherine and I barely had a relationship. We maybe spoke 5 times in my entire life, and those were just polite conversations at Christmas or funerals. "There's no mistake, Nicole," Margaret said firmly. "Catherine left very specific instructions that you were to be contacted immediately upon her death. You need to come to Chicago as soon as possible, sir." The urgency in her voice made my stomach drop, and I knew something big was about to change. As I drove the 3 hours to Chicago that afternoon, my mind was spinning with confusion and worry. What could my great-aunt Catherine possibly want with me? Why had she asked for me specifically when we barely knew each other? I kept thinking about the last time I saw her at my grandmother's funeral 2 years earlier, how she had pulled me aside and said something strange that I never understood until now. "Nicole, you have something special that the rest of this family lacks," she had whispered. "And when the time comes, you'll understand what I mean." Growing up in our small Wisconsin town, I was definitely the odd one out in my family, and if you've ever felt like the black sheep but in a good way, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because this story shows how being different can sometimes save your life. My parents, David and Susan, were practical people who measured success by how much money you made and how many nice things you owned. They ran a successful plumbing business and were always talking about expanding, buying new equipment, or investing in rental properties. Money was constantly on their minds, and they never understood why I chose nursing over a higher-paying career. Have you ever disappointed your parents by following your heart instead of chasing money? My relationship with my parents had always been complicated because we saw the world so differently. They loved me, but they thought I was wasting my potential by working at the hospital instead of pursuing something more profitable. "Nicole, you're smart enough to be a doctor or a lawyer," my mom would say almost every time we talked. "Why are you settling for a job that barely pays the bills?" They meant well, but they never understood that I found fulfillment in helping people, not in accumulating wealth. The truth is, I had always felt more connected to my great-aunt Catherine during those rare family gatherings than I did to most of my immediate family. While everyone else would make small talk about sports or gossip, Catherine would ask me about my work at the hospital, about the patients I helped, and about my volunteer work with animals. She seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person, not what I could achieve or accumulate. I never thought much about these conversations at the time, but now I realize she was studying me. Catherine lived in a beautiful old brownstone in Chicago, but whenever she visited us, she dressed simply and never talked about her life in the city. My parents always assumed she was just another retired lady living on a fixed income, maybe with a small pension from whatever job she had before retiring. None of us knew anything about her financial situation, her investments, or the empire she had been quietly building for over 50 years. She was a mystery that none of us bothered to solve. What I've learned since then is that Catherine was incredibly similar to my grandmother Eleanor in many ways. Both women who lived through hard times, both incredibly intelligent, and both masters at hiding their true wealth from family members who might have treated them differently if they knew the truth. Catherine had been watching our family dynamics for years, taking notes on who showed genuine kindness versus who was motivated by personal gain. And somehow, in all of that observation, she decided that I was the one person she could trust with her life's work. If you've ever had someone in your family who seemed to understand you better than your own parents, smash that like button and subscribe because you'll relate to this next part of my story. My grandparents, Eleanor and Thomas, always told me something that stuck with me through everything that happened next. "Nicole," my grandmother Eleanor would say while we sat on her old porch swing, "money doesn't define who you are, but it sure can reveal who everyone else really is." She and my grandfather had so much wisdom, but they lived like they didn't have anything special. They taught me that real wealth came from your heart, your honesty, and how you treat people when nobody's watching. Have you ever had older family members who just seemed to see right through people's true intentions? I remember how they would spend their evenings together. My grandfather reading the newspaper while my grandmother knitted blankets for the local shelter. They never bought expensive things, never went on fancy vacations, and never talked about investments or bank accounts. Their house was filled with handmade furniture, family photos, and the smell of fresh-baked cookies. Everything about their lifestyle screamed modest retired couple living on a pension, and that's exactly what I believed they were. My parents would sometimes complain that Grandma and Grandpa were too generous, with local charities considering their limited income. What made my relationship with them so special was how they treated me like an adult, even when I was just a kid. They would ask for my opinions on things, listen to my problems without judgment, and always encourage me to think for myself. My grandmother Eleanor had this way of teaching life lessons through stories about her childhood during the Depression. "We learned to value what really mattered," she'd tell me. And it wasn't the things you could buy in a store. She would describe how neighbors helped each other survive, how sharing a meal was more valuable than owning expensive dishes. My grandfather Thomas was the quiet strength behind everything my grandmother did. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened because his words carried weight. He taught me about hard work, perseverance, and standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. "Nicole, integrity is like a foundation," he once told me while we were working in his garden. "You can't see it, but without it, everything else will eventually crumble." He would always emphasize that character was something you built daily through small choices, not something you could buy or inherit. Looking back now, I realize they were preparing me for something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. Every lesson about humility, every story about doing the right thing when nobody's watching, every conversation about using your resources to help others, it was all building up to this moment. They weren't just sharing random wisdom with their granddaughter. They were training me to handle a responsibility that would test everything they had taught me about character and values. What I didn't know was that their sister Catherine had been watching me learn these lessons, and she approved of what she saw. If you're wondering how finding out about $30 million can actually ruin your life, make sure to like this video and subscribe because trust me, this gets so much more complicated than you think. I walked into Margaret Collins' law office that Thursday afternoon, thinking maybe Catherine had left me a piece of jewelry or a small memento to remember her by. I was completely unprepared for what Margaret was about to tell me, and honestly, nothing in my simple life as a nurse could have prepared me for this kind of shock. The office was intimidating with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago, expensive artwork, and the kind of furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew your life was about to change forever but had no idea how? Margaret opened a thick leather portfolio and pulled out document after document, each one more shocking than the last. "Nicole," she said, looking directly into my eyes, "your great-aunt Catherine left you her entire estate, valued at approximately $30 million. Yi chow." I literally started laughing because I thought she was pulling some kind of elaborate prank. There's no way my quiet great-aunt who I barely knew could have had that kind of money. But as Margaret continued showing me property deeds, investment portfolios, and bank statements, the laughter died in my throat and reality started to crash over me like a tsunami. The inheritance included a portfolio of commercial real estate properties across 5 major cities, a diversified investment account that had been growing for over 40 years, and ownership stakes in several successful businesses that I didn't even know existed. Catherine had been quietly building this empire while living modestly, and keeping her wealth completely secret from our entire family. The woman I thought was just another retired relative was actually a financial mastermind who had accumulated more wealth than most people see in 10 lifetimes. She had started with nothing and built everything through careful planning, smart investments, and incredible patience. What completely broke me wasn't just the amount of money, but the personal letter that came with all the legal documents. In Catherine's careful handwriting, she explained that she had been watching our family for years, observing how everyone treated money, relationships, and responsibilities. She wrote that she chose me because I was the only family member who showed genuine kindness without expecting anything in return, who valued people over possessions, and who had dedicated my life to helping others. "Use this wisely, my dear Nicole," the letter said, "and remember that with great wealth comes the opportunity to change lives, but also the danger of losing yourself." Sitting in that luxurious office, holding papers worth more money than I could comprehend, I felt overwhelmed, terrified, grateful, and completely lost all at the same time. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a test, a responsibility, and potentially a blessing, or a curse depending on how I handled it. I had no idea how to manage this kind of wealth, no experience with investments or business decisions, and most importantly, I had no idea how my family was going to react when they found out. What I didn't realize was that the real nightmare was just beginning, and it would come from the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. If you've ever had family members suddenly become super interested in your life after years of barely calling, hit that like and subscribe button because you're about to hear how fake people reveal themselves when money enters the picture. My phone started ringing nonstop the moment I got back from Chicago, and I mean literally within hours of signing those inheritance documents. Suddenly, my family, who barely checked on me once a month, was calling me every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. My parents, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, everyone wanted to catch up and see how I was doing. At first, I thought it was sweet that everyone was being so caring and attentive, but something felt off about the timing. Have you ever noticed how people's behavior changes when they think you have something they want? The conversations all followed the same weird pattern that made my stomach feel uneasy. They would start with fake concern about my well-being, asking about work and my apartment, then slowly steer the conversation toward my recent trip to Chicago. "So Nicole, what was that lawyer meeting about?" my mom asked during one of her daily calls. Was it just some paperwork, or was there more to it? The way she asked made it clear that she already suspected something big had happened, but I wasn't ready to share the news yet. My dad, David, was even more direct in his approach, which honestly didn't surprise me knowing his personality. He showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening with takeout from my favorite Chinese restaurant. "Nicole, honey, your mom and I are worried about you," he said while unpacking the food. "You seem different since that Chicago trip, and we just want to make sure you're okay." Then he paused and looked at me with this intense expression I'd never seen before. "If something important happened, you know you can trust us, right?" The pressure was building every single day, and I could feel my family closing in on me like vultures circling their prey. My cousin Jessica, who hadn't called me in over 2 years, suddenly wanted to have lunch and reconnect as family. My uncle Mark, who had always treated me like I was invisible at family gatherings, invited me to go fishing and bond as uncle and niece. Everyone was being so nice, so interested, so caring, but it all felt fake and calculated. It was like they could smell the money on me somehow. What really scared me was how quickly I started to see my family in a completely different light. These were people I had loved and trusted my entire life, but now I was questioning every interaction, every smile, every kind word. Were they genuinely happy to see me, or were they trying to figure out what I knew about Catherine's estate? I started to understand what my grandmother Eleanor meant when she said money reveals people's true character. I was about to discover just how right she was, and just how wrong I had been about the people closest to me. My mother Linda's behavior became so obvious that I started to feel sick every time she called. And if you've ever had someone try to emotionally manipulate you, make sure to subscribe because this gets so much worse. She began calling me every single day, sometimes twice a day, with this fake, sweet voice that I had never heard her use before. "Nicole, sweetie, I've been thinking about our family finances lately," she would say, and I realized that maybe we could all help each other out more. Then she would launch into stories about how hard things were at the plumbing business, how they were struggling to expand, and how they had always sacrificed so much for me growing up. The manipulation was so transparent that I couldn't believe I was hearing it from my own mother. She started bringing up every single thing they had ever done for me, from paying for my nursing school to buying me that old pickup truck. "We never asked for anything in return, Nicole," she would say with this martyred tone. "But now that you might have some opportunities, maybe you could remember how much we've invested in you." She made it sound like my education and upbringing were loans that I needed to pay back with interest. My dad took a completely different approach that was somehow even more disturbing than my mom's guilt trips. He became this overly friendly, buddy-buddy version of himself that felt like he was wearing a mask. David started showing up at my workplace during my lunch breaks, bringing me coffee and wanting to chat about life. He would sit across from me in the hospital cafeteria and say things like, "You know, Nicole, your old dad has learned a lot about business over the years, and I could really help you make smart decisions if you ever need financial advice." The worst part was watching how they started to treat me like I was stupid or incapable of making my own decisions. "Nicole, honey, you're such a caring person, but you're not business-minded like your father and I," my mom said during one particularly awful phone call. "Money can be dangerous in the wrong hands, and we just want to protect you from making mistakes that could hurt your future." They were basically saying that I was too naive and too generous to handle money responsibly, which was ironic considering I had been managing my own finances just fine for years. What really broke my heart was realizing that this wasn't sudden behavior. This was probably how they had always felt about me, but they had never had a reason to show it before. They saw me as the sweet, simple daughter who needed guidance and protection, not as a capable adult who could make her own choices. The inheritance had simply revealed what they truly thought of me, and it was devastating to discover that the people who raised me had so little faith in my judgment and character. I was starting to understand that this battle was going to be much bigger than just money. If you've ever had to stand up to your own parents and felt your heart breaking while doing it, please hit that like button and subscribe because this confrontation changed everything between us forever. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon when my parents invited me over for what I thought was just a normal family dinner. I should have known something was wrong when I walked into their house and saw my Uncle Mark, Aunt Carol, and Cousin Jessica, all sitting around the dining room table with serious expressions on their faces. "Nicole, sit down," my dad said in his business voice, the same tone he used when firing employees. "We need to have a family meeting about your situation. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you were being ambushed by people you trusted?" My dad cleared his throat and leaned forward like he was about to deliver a business presentation. "Nicole, we know about Catherine's inheritance," he said bluntly. "And frankly, we're concerned about your ability to handle this kind of responsibility." The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I felt betrayed, angry, and hurt all at the same time because they had been pretending not to know while manipulating me for weeks. "How did you find out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hands were shaking under the table. That's when my Uncle Mark jumped in with this patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. "Nicole, sweetie, Catherine's lawyer had to contact the family for legal reasons," he explained, like I was a child who couldn't understand adult matters. "The point is, $30 million is serious money that requires serious management." Then my Aunt Carol added, "We've all been talking, and we think it would be best if your father handled the inheritance through the family business. That way, everyone benefits and you don't have to worry about making any big mistakes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had been meeting behind my back, planning how to take my inheritance away from me. My mother's approach was the most hurtful because she tried to disguise her greed as motherly concern. "Honey, you're such a good person with such a big heart," she said while reaching across the table to grab my hand. "But people like you get taken advantage of when they have money." She explained how I was too trusting and too generous to protect myself from people who might try to use me. "Let your father invest it properly," she continued, "and you can have a nice monthly allowance without any of the stress or responsibility." They were literally treating me like I was incompetent to manage my own life. The conversation escalated quickly when I told them I wasn't going to hand over my inheritance to anyone. My dad's friendly mask completely dropped, and I saw a side of him that terrified me. "Nicole, you're being selfish and stupid," he said, raising his voice for the first time in years. "This money could set our entire family up for generations, but you're too naive to see the bigger picture." That's when I realized this wasn't about protecting me or helping me. This was about them feeling entitled to money that was never theirs in the first place. The war had officially begun, and I was fighting against the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The weeks following that family meeting turned into a psychological warfare campaign that would have impressed military strategists. And if you've ever been gaslighted by people you love, make sure to subscribe because this manipulation was next level. My parents recruited every single family member to pressure me into changing my mind about keeping the inheritance. They created this coordinated attack where different relatives would call me with the same talking points, making it seem like the entire family had independently reached the same conclusion about my poor judgment. My cousin Jessica called crying about her student loans, my Uncle Mark showed up at the hospital talking about his mortgage problems, and my Aunt Carol sent me articles about lottery winners who went bankrupt. Have you ever felt like everyone you trusted was suddenly working against you? The emotional manipulation reached levels that I didn't even know were possible within a family. My mother started having health scares that always seemed to happen right after I refused to discuss the inheritance with them. She would call me crying about chest pains or headaches, and when I rushed over to help her, she would mysteriously feel better and want to talk about how stress was affecting the whole family because of my stubbornness. My dad began showing up at my apartment at random times, sometimes late at night, wanting to check on me, but really trying to wear me down with constant conversations about financial responsibility. They even tried to turn my own memories against me by rewriting our family history. "Nicole, remember when we helped you through nursing school?" my dad would say during his surprise visits. "Remember how we supported your dreams even when we couldn't afford it?" They started acting like every good thing they had ever done for me was actually a sacrifice that deserved to be repaid with Catherine's money. It was like they were keeping a detailed ledger of parental duties and presenting me with a bill that I never knew I was accumulating. The most painful part was watching how they talked about me to other people in our small town. I started hearing rumors that I had changed since getting money, that I was becoming selfish and forgetting where I came from. They were spreading stories about how the inheritance was making me greedy and distant from family, when the truth was that I was pulling away because of their constant pressure and manipulation. They were destroying my reputation in our community to try to force me into giving them what they wanted. What really opened my eyes was a conversation I accidentally overheard between my parents when I came home early from work one day. I heard my dad telling my mom, "If Nicole won't listen to reason, we'll have to explore other options. That money belongs to this family, not just to her." The coldness in his voice, the way he talked about me like I was an obstacle instead of his daughter, made me realize that I was truly on my own in this battle. They weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted, and I needed to prepare myself for whatever came next. If you've ever felt the weight of doing the right thing when everyone around you is pushing you to do the wrong thing, please like and subscribe, because this is where I had to find strength I didn't know I had. I spent countless sleepless nights thinking about what my grandparents Eleanor and Thomas would have wanted me to do with Catherine's inheritance. They had always taught me that money was just a tool, and the real question was what kind of impact you wanted to make with that tool. I kept hearing my grandmother's voice saying, "Nicole, honey, with great blessings come great responsibilities." And I knew that simply handing over $30 million to my parents' plumbing business wasn't what Catherine had in mind when she chose me. Have you ever had to make a decision that you knew would disappoint people you love, but was still the right thing to do? I started researching what Catherine had actually done with her money during her lifetime, and what I discovered completely changed my perspective on everything. She had been quietly funding scholarships for underprivileged students, supporting women's shelters, and investing in small businesses owned by minorities and immigrants. Her wealth wasn't just sitting in bank accounts collecting interest. It was actively working to make the world a better place. Catherine had built an empire not just for herself, but as a force for good in society, and now she was trusting me to continue that mission. The more I learned about Catherine's charitable work, the more I understood why she had chosen me specifically. She had been watching how I volunteered at the animal shelter, how I stayed late at the hospital to comfort patients who had no family, and how I used my small salary to help coworkers who were struggling financially. Catherine saw that I already had the heart of a philanthropist. I just needed the resources to make a bigger impact. She wasn't just giving me money, she was giving me the opportunity to become the person I was meant to be. I realized that honoring my grandparents' legacy meant using this inheritance strategically and purposefully, not just distributing it to family members who would probably waste it on material things. My grandmother had always said that the best way to honor someone's memory was to continue their good work in the world. Catherine had spent decades building something meaningful, and now it was my responsibility to make sure that work continued and grew even bigger. This wasn't about keeping money away from my family out of spite. This was about respecting the wishes of a woman who had trusted me with her life's work. The weight of this responsibility was both terrifying and inspiring at the same time. I knew that my decision would affect not just my own future, but potentially the lives of thousands of people who could benefit from Catherine's continued philanthropy. I also knew that choosing this path would probably cost me my relationship with my family, at least temporarily. But as I sat in my small apartment looking at Catherine's letter for the 100th time, I realized that disappointing my parents was a small price to pay for honoring the legacy of a woman who had seen something special in me when I couldn't even see it in myself. When my family realized that I wasn't going to hand over the inheritance willingly, their true colors came out in ways that still give me nightmares. So if you want to see how far people will go when money is involved, smash that like button and subscribe. The fake kindness and concern disappeared overnight, replaced by threats, accusations, and behavior that I never thought I would see from people who claimed to love me. My dad went from being the caring father figure to becoming this cold, calculating businessman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his financial goals. My mom transformed from the worried mother into this manipulative woman who used every emotional weapon in her arsenal to try to break me down. Have you ever watched people you love turn into complete strangers right before your eyes? The legal threats started about 2 weeks after our family meeting, when they realized that gentle pressure wasn't going to work. My dad called me on a Friday evening and said in the most businesslike tone, "Nicole, we've consulted with our attorney, and we're prepared to contest Catherine's will if you don't reconsider your position." He explained that they believed Catherine wasn't mentally competent when she wrote the will, and that I had somehow manipulated or influenced her to leave me the money instead of the family. The accusation hit me like a physical blow because anyone who knew me understood that I barely had a relationship with Catherine. My Uncle Mark took the intimidation to another level by showing up at the hospital where I worked and causing a scene in front of my colleagues and patients. "Nicole, you're tearing this family apart," he yelled in the lobby. "And for what? Money that you don't even deserve?" He accused me of being greedy, selfish, and forgetting where I came from. The embarrassment was overwhelming, especially since I had to explain to my supervisor why my family drama was disrupting the workplace. It felt like they were trying to destroy every aspect of my life until I gave them what they wanted. The emotional manipulation reached its peak when my mother started crying every time she saw me, telling everyone in town that I had changed since receiving the inheritance. She would show up at places where she knew I would be, the grocery store, the bank, the coffee shop, and make these public displays of hurt and disappointment. "I don't even recognize my own daughter anymore," she would say loud enough for other people to hear. Money has poisoned her heart against her own family. She was trying to turn our entire community against me. What hurt the most was when they started attacking Catherine's memory and character to justify their legal challenge. They claimed that she had always been mentally unstable, and that her decision to leave me the inheritance was proof of her declining mental health. They were willing to destroy the reputation of a woman who had lived with dignity and purpose for over 80 years just to get their hands on money that was never theirs. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about greed. This was about control, entitlement, and a complete lack of respect for Catherine's wishes and my autonomy as an adult. If you've ever had to choose between keeping peace with your family or standing up for what's right, hit that like button and subscribe, because this decision literally changed the entire course of my life. After weeks of constant pressure, threats, and manipulation, I reached a breaking point where I had to make a choice that would define who I was as a person. I was sitting in my apartment on a rainy Saturday morning, looking at Catherine's letter for what felt like the 1,000th time, when something inside me just clicked. I realized that I couldn't let fear of losing my family stop me from honoring the trust that Catherine had placed in me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about integrity, respect for the dead, and staying true to the values that my grandparents had instilled in me. Have you ever had a moment where you knew that backing down would mean losing yourself forever? I called Margaret Collins, Catherine's attorney, and told her that I wanted to move forward with accepting the full inheritance and implementing Catherine's charitable foundation exactly as she had outlined in her will. "But I want to honor her wishes completely," I told Margaret, "regardless of what my family thinks or threatens to do." Margaret seemed relieved and told me that Catherine had actually anticipated family pushback and had included specific legal protections in the will to prevent anyone from challenging my right to the inheritance. Catherine had been 10 steps ahead of everyone, including my parents' greedy schemes. The decision felt like putting on armor against every emotional attack and manipulation tactic my family had been using against me. I realized that Catherine had chosen me not because I was weak or easily controlled, but because she saw strength in me that even I didn't recognize. She had watched me stand up for patients at the hospital, defend animals at the shelter, and maintain my principles even when it would have been easier to compromise. Catherine knew I had the backbone to handle this responsibility, even if it meant standing alone against my entire family. I started documenting every threat, every manipulation attempt, and every lie my family had told about Catherine's mental state. I gathered evidence of Catherine's sharp mind and clear intentions, including emails she had sent just weeks before her death, and testimonies from her friends and neighbors about her mental clarity. I wasn't going to let them destroy her reputation or invalidate her final wishes without a fight. If they wanted to play legal games, I was going to be prepared with facts, evidence, and the truth on my side. The moment I made this decision, I felt both terrified and liberated at the same time. I was terrified because I knew I was about to lose my family, at least temporarily, and possibly forever. But I was also liberated because I was finally taking control of my own life and refusing to be bullied into making decisions based on fear. I was choosing to honor Catherine's trust in me, even if it meant walking through fire to do it. Little did I know that the fire was about to get much hotter than I had ever imagined. When my family realized that I wasn't going to back down, their behavior escalated to levels that I never thought possible from people who claim to love me. And if you think your family drama is bad, make sure to subscribe, because this is about to get absolutely insane. Within 48 hours of my conversation with Margaret Collins, my parents had hired their own attorney and filed papers to contest Catherine's will on grounds of mental incompetence and undue influence. They claimed that I had somehow manipulated a woman I barely knew into leaving me $30 million, which was so ridiculous that even their lawyer seemed embarrassed to be making the argument. But they weren't just challenging the will. They were challenging my character, my integrity, and my right to make decisions about my own life. The harassment became so intense that I had to change my phone number and ask my landlord, Mrs. Peterson, to stop letting my family members into the building. My dad would show up at my apartment at all hours of the day and night, pounding on my door and demanding that I stop this nonsense before it destroys our family forever. My mom started following me to work, to the grocery store, and even to my volunteer shifts at the animal shelter, crying and making scenes in public places. "Please don't let money turn you against your own family," she would sob, loud enough for everyone around us to hear and judge me. The legal battle turned into a public spectacle that humiliated me in our small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents gave interviews to the local newspaper claiming that I had become obsessed with money and was betraying my family's values. They painted themselves as the victims of a greedy daughter who had forgotten where she came from. Meanwhile, they were spending thousands of dollars on legal fees to try to take money that was never theirs, which seemed pretty obsessed with money to me, but apparently that irony was lost on them. What pushed me over the edge was when they started attacking my job performance and my volunteer work. They called the hospital administration claiming that I was emotionally unstable and shouldn't be trusted with patient care. They told the animal shelter that I was going through personal issues that made me unreliable as a volunteer. They were literally trying to destroy every good thing in my life just to pressure me into giving them Catherine's money. It was like watching the people who raised me transform into monsters who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. The final straw came when my cousin Jessica, who I had considered more like a sister than a cousin, confronted me in the hospital parking lot after my shift. "Nicole, you're being selfish," she screamed, "and you're hurting people who love you for money that you don't even need." She accused me of thinking I was better than the rest of the family and said that Catherine had obviously lost her mind to leave everything to someone so ungrateful. Hearing those words from Jessica, who I had shared secrets with and supported through her own difficult times, broke something inside me that I don't think will ever fully heal. If you've ever wondered whether doing the right thing is worth losing everything you thought mattered, hit that like button and subscribe because this ending will surprise you in the best possible way. After 6 months of legal battles, family harassment, and public humiliation, I finally won the court case and secured my right to Catherine's inheritance. The judge ruled that Catherine had been completely mentally competent when she wrote her will, and that my family's claims of manipulation were baseless and offensive. But winning the legal battle was just the beginning of my real journey. I had to figure out how to use this incredible gift in a way that would make Catherine proud and honor the values my grandparents had taught me. Have you ever had a victory that felt bittersweet because of what you had to sacrifice to achieve it? I decided to use the inheritance to create the Catherine Eleanor Foundation, named after both my great-aunt and my grandmother, focusing on education, healthcare, and animal welfare. Within the first year, we established scholarship programs for nursing students from low-income families, funded free medical clinics in underserved communities, and built a state-of-the-art animal rescue facility. Seeing the impact that Catherine's money was making in real people's lives gave me a sense of purpose that I never had before. Every scholarship recipient, every patient who received free care, every rescued animal was proof that Catherine had made the right choice in trusting me with her legacy. The most amazing part of this whole experience was discovering a community of people who supported my decision to honor Catherine's wishes, instead of caving to family pressure. My coworkers at the hospital, my friends from the animal shelter, and even strangers in town who heard about the foundation reached out to offer their support and encouragement. I learned that real family isn't always the people you're related to by blood. Sometimes it's the people who see your character and choose to stand by you when things get difficult. As for my parents and the rest of my biological family, we're slowly working toward rebuilding our relationship, but it's not the same as it was before. They eventually apologized for their behavior, but I think they were more sorry about losing the legal battle than they were about how they treated me. My mom and dad have started coming around to the idea that I'm using the money responsibly, especially when they see the positive publicity the foundation generates for our town. It's going to take time to fully trust them again, but I'm willing to work on it because forgiveness is part of who I want to be. The foundation has grown beyond anything I could have imagined, and I wake up every day excited about the lives we're going to change and the problems we're going to solve. Catherine's $30 million has already helped thousands of people, and we're just getting started. I've learned that true wealth isn't about how much money you have in the bank. It's about how much good you can do with whatever resources you've been given. Catherine knew that when she chose me, and I'm grateful every day that she saw something in me that I'm still discovering about myself. Looking back, I realize this whole experience taught me that standing up for what's right is never easy, but it's always worth it in the end. My family tried to convince me that I was being selfish, but what they really meant was that I wasn't being selfish in the way they wanted me to be. Catherine's inheritance didn't change who I am. It just gave me the resources to become who I was always meant to be. The most important lesson I learned from this entire experience is that money doesn't corrupt people. It just reveals who they really were all along. And if you've learned something valuable from my story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more real-life drama. My parents weren't good people who became bad because of $30 million. They were people who had always valued money over relationships, but they had never been in a situation where that priority was tested so dramatically. Catherine's inheritance didn't create greed in my family. It just exposed the greed that was already there, hidden underneath years of normal, everyday interactions. Have you ever had an experience that made you see people you thought you knew in a completely different light? What breaks my heart the most is realizing how many warning signs I had missed over the years about my family's true values and priorities. I remember my parents constantly talking about money at family dinners, always comparing themselves to neighbors and friends based on material possessions, and making comments about people who wasted their money on charity instead of building wealth for their families. I had dismissed these conversations as normal adult concerns, but now I see them as glimpses into their real character. They had always believed that family money should stay within the family, regardless of how it could help others. The experience taught me that integrity is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes. But if you don't use it regularly, it atrophies and disappears when you need it most. My family had spent so many years prioritizing comfort, security, and material success over doing the right thing that when they were finally tested, they failed completely. They chose money over relationships, greed over love, and legal warfare over respect for a dead woman's wishes. It was heartbreaking to watch, but it also showed me exactly who I never wanted to become. I've also learned that being alone isn't the same thing as being lonely, and sometimes walking away from toxic people is the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved. The friends I've made through the foundation, the people whose lives we've changed, and the community of supporters who believe in our mission have become my chosen family. These are people who value character over bank accounts, who measure success by impact rather than income, and who understand that true wealth comes from making the world a little bit better than you found it. Looking forward, I know that my relationship with my biological family will never be the same as it was before, and honestly, I'm okay with that. We're building something new based on honesty, boundaries, and mutual respect, rather than the old dynamic of guilt, obligation, and unspoken expectations. Some relationships have to be completely broken down before they can be rebuilt on a stronger foundation, and maybe that's what needed to happen with my family. Catherine's inheritance didn't just change my bank account. It changed my entire understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. If this story has taught you anything about standing up for your values even when it costs you everything, please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications because I want to hear your thoughts on this incredible journey. I've shared the most painful and transformative experience of my life with you today. And now I want to know what you think about the choices I made. Would you have done the same thing in my position? Or would you have given in to family pressure to keep the peace? Do you think I was right to honor Catherine's wishes, even though it meant going to war with my own parents? Leave your honest opinions in the comments below because I read every single one, and I genuinely value your perspective on this situation. What I want you to take away from my story is that sometimes the hardest decisions in life are also the most important ones for your personal growth and integrity. When I was sitting in that lawyer's office 6 months ago, I thought inheriting $30 million would solve problems and make life easier. Instead, it created the biggest challenge I've ever faced and forced me to discover who I really am when everything is on the line. The money didn't change me, but the experience of fighting for what's right absolutely transformed me into a stronger, more confident person who knows her own worth. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who support you, believe in you, and stand by you when times get tough. My biological family failed that test spectacularly, but I've found a new family through the foundation work, the people whose lives we've changed, and supporters like you who understand that doing good in the world matters more than keeping everyone happy. Sometimes you have to lose the family you were born into in order to find the family you were meant to have. The Catherine Eleanor Foundation has now helped over 500 students attend college, provided free healthcare to thousands of people, and rescued more than 200 animals from abuse and neglect. Every life we touch, every person we help, and every positive change we make in the world is proof that Catherine made the right choice in trusting me with her legacy. This inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about continuing a mission of compassion and generosity that will outlive all of us. Before I go, I want to encourage you to think about your own life and the values that guide your decisions. Are you living according to your own principles, or are you letting other people's expectations control your choices? Are you using whatever resources you have, whether it's time, money, skills, or just kindness, to make a positive difference in the world around you? You don't need $30 million to change lives. You just need the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next video, where I'll share some of the most incredible success stories from our foundation and show you exactly how we're changing lives every single day.